Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the session led by Stephane Fournier. This session is called Introduction to Design Systems, and my name is Amy. I will be your moderator today for all the product and design sessions. So if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to add them to the chat. Stephane may answer them as they come up, or we'll come back at the end to get them all answered. This theme is sponsored by Gearbox, so a huge thank you to them for their support of Startup Slam. You can learn more about them at their virtual booth today, anytime before 1 p.m., so you still have a little bit of time after this session. Stephane has been working for 15 years. Stephane has 15 years of agency experience working at Canada's top agencies, including Tribal, DDB, Cassette, Origin, and Blast Radius. He has worked with clients such as Adidas, Nike, Starbucks, Whistler Blackcomb, the North Face, and BCAA. He describes himself as liking to solve design challenges with good people. So, without further ado, Stephane, do you want to take it away?
Fantastic. Hey, everyone. Great to meet you. It's interesting to not see any faces and to be talking to my wall. And I'm so happy you guys are here to join me today. Hopefully, we'll be able to have a good time together. As Amy mentioned, when I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see if you have any questions in the chat. So if there's anything, Amy will either interrupt me or we'll make sure to keep some time at the end of the presentation to go back over the presentation. So that said, let me turn this thing full screen. Are you guys seeing the presentation properly at the moment? I'm assuming silence means that everything is good.
Yes.
Amy? Yes?
Yes,
okay, fantastic. Awesome. So as per Amy's comment, today's presentation is about design systems, most specifically within a startup world, which is our world together. So let's get started without further ado. The first thing we want to talk about is to have no fears of perfection in your design systems. You'll never reach it. That's a Salvador Dali quote. So if it's good enough for him, it's probably good enough for us. And I wanted to preface with that because a lot of us are intimidated with design systems. Oh, it can be so complex. There's so many states. There's so many this. Doesn't really matter. Let's get started with the basics and we'll just keep iterating and keep building. So we're in a good place. So quick thing. Hello, I'm really glad you guys are here. Amy did a great intro. I hate intros. I hate talking about the work I've done. That's just who I am, relatively humble. But I wanted to say thank you to everyone here at Startup Slam for inviting me, everyone in today's chat for showing up. I really appreciate. And a big thank you to the Gearbox team. They're fantastic folks out of Victoria. Please check out their booth. They do great work. I've been lucky to work with them on a couple of projects in the past. Fantastic, human, good people. And I'm really happy to have had the chance to collaborate and to keep collaborating with them. So today's agenda is simple. Introductions. We've already gone through a lot of that. Number 2, we're going to be defining design systems at a high level. 3, we're going to add the startup to the mix because I think design systems and startup actually do something interesting when you put them together. And then number 4, we're going to talk about solutions, which is mostly trying to keep things as modular as we can. So that's hopefully the plan for today's talk. And without further ado, let's get started. Wanted to open up with this question mark. Yes, please.
I don't think I saw your presentation slide move.
Oh, are we still on the first screen?
Yeah, the yellow with the, oh, there we go.
Okay. So are you guys, so now it's updating?
Now it's the question mark, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, now it's working.
Strange. So that's going to be a quick problem. So I'm going to have to do it this way, I guess. Now it's updating?
Yes.
Oh, I've done a bunch of animations. So you guys won't get to see all the wicked animations I created, but such is life. There were amazing transitions and effects and all that, but hopefully I'll have to step up my game and keep you interested instead of the animations. So no pressure. So I want to add this slide right here because I know there's a lot of us are in a lot of different fields, correct? Project managers, developers, designers, UX, UI, project managers, probably some interns or students. So I wanted to keep this presentation at a very high level and really hopefully out of this presentation, hopefully elucidate some of the unknown unknowns and turn those into known unknowns. And then hopefully people will be able to have communications within their agencies and within their projects. So once again, very high level, because I know we're speaking to a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds. Quick note about myself, you've done a great job, Amy. I'm Stephane Fournier. Nothing much to see here. A few clients I've worked for. So I've had the chance to work for Adidas, for Nike with Air Jordan, Pepsi Canada recently on a project, and this last one, Bode, right here. And the reason I wanted to call out Bode is that one of these things isn't quite like the others. And that's right, one of them is a startup. And I love this definition of a startup. A startup is a company working to solve a problem where the solution is not obvious and success is not guaranteed. I think that's where a lot of us are currently in, so that's really interesting. With that being said, let's start defining what a design system is, and then we'll add the startup to the mix. So I had a wicked animation here, so we won't be seeing that, but a design system in a whole is a collection of reusable components guided to clear standards that enable us to build out our applications. There's a lot of words on this page because if some of you want to leave behind PDF, I'll be happy to supply. But all in all, a design system is a collection of all the symbols and UI patterns that we'll be using to build our apps, our websites, or what have you. And they're as useful, obviously, for the UI and the UX team, but they're also useful for our developer friends. Hopefully, we're both building and iterating upon the same components to eventually build out the functionality of our websites, apps, or SAS, whatever we are building. One quick note before we dive into design systems, I wanted to take a quick high-level talk about atomic design because that is really key to understanding how to build a design system, in my opinion. And atomic design is a methodology for creating design systems, simple as that. And the reason it's called atomic design was this great gift that we can't see right here. But all in all, is this idea of designing from atoms to molecules, organisms, templates, and pages, and we'll go over what those mean in a couple of seconds. But this idea of designing small elements, and within those, you'll be able to build upon them to create more complex elements. So at a high level, when you're working on a design system, you want to work with your atoms. And the atoms are the smallest elements of a design system. So in this case, you can see a project I was working on recently for that startup Bode I spoke about before. You can see the atoms could be an H1 styling, an H2. It could be the individual colors that we're developing for the platform. So these are your atoms. They're the building blocks of your design system. At a secondary level, you have what we call our molecules. Molecules are where atoms come together to create something. For example, the search widget, it has a label, search lyrics. There's a box. There's a label within it, try dance macabre, which is some helper text for the user. There's an icon, and there's different colors coming together. So you can see how we're mixing all those atoms together to create something a little bit more complex, but it's really just a widget or a molecule that kind of lives by itself. At another level, then you can have what we call organisms. And organisms are when multiple components, multiple atoms and molecules kind of come together to create something a little more complex. In this case, we're looking, for example, at a full screen navigation on a mobile phone, where you'll have some icons such as the X, you'll have your navigation, you'll have some links. So a lot of different molecules and organisms are coming together to create your organisms. All those then eventually come together to build out a template. And a template is really a complete page, but that doesn't necessarily have the final content. So in this case, we're looking at a template for, once again, that project Bode I was talking about, which is sort of it's like a do-it-yourself real estate platform, really interesting solution. And in this case, this would be one of the templates is the listing page. So everything that happens to be on your listing page is a template, but once again, the listing page being agnostic of final content, where everything, in this case, obviously we see content, but some of the copy is temporary, some of the images are FPO. And in this case, we designed one template for listing page, but obviously when you get to the site, there'll be hundreds and hundreds of listings, and those individual listings will be the actual pages, which is your last sort of evolution of the atomic system. In this case, I grabbed a screenshot of a page on Pitchfork for a review for the Rolling Stones album. So this is an example of a page where they built the template for a record review, but every time they populate this with new content, new images, new photos, and what have you, this then turns into an individual page. So those are sort of your 5 levels of elements that kind of come together to build your atomic design, with which you'll be able to build out your design system. A lot of this is obviously table stakes for a lot of you, and for some of you it's possibly new. Robert Frost came up with atomic design a long time ago. There's been a lot of writings, a lot of videos about it. I do strongly encourage that you check it out and do a little bit more research. Once again, whether you're in the design or the development field, I think having a firm grasp of atomic design and understanding it is going to be very helpful. It's going to help you design better, design more modular, and ultimately build and code more modular. So obviously the big question, why do we want atomic design? Well, there's 4 reasons. The first is reusability. Once you create an atom or a molecule, you can keep reusing it. And just like this cup that you can reuse, reusing enables you to work faster, work smarter, but ultimately be more efficient, and also create patterns that are consistent for your users, which is ultimately very important. If a user is interacting with an element, if that element changes shape or colors or the way it behaves all the time, it can create for a very disjointed experience. Whereas if we continually reuse the same kind of elements in a pattern, the user will have a much easier understanding of what they're trying to accomplish and how to do so on, once again, our project that we're building. I'm really saddened that you can't see the great animations. This is gonna all animate down and be all awesome for you guys. Number 2, one thing we love about atomic design is obviously uniformity. The idea that if we keep using the same atoms to build things in the same organisms, well, things are more uniform and therefore, once again, faster, more efficient, more consistent. A third thing that we love about it is the extendability. Well, obviously, the great thing is once you've got your atoms and your organisms, you can mix and match them to create really quickly a lot of different components and a lot of different pages and templates. This is extremely helpful when we get into design sprints and we want to go from an idea to a sketch to a prototype to get to some user testing ASAP. Being able to draw upon these components as fast as we can and switch them around really quickly enables us to get to the valuable phase, which is the testing phase and the learning phase. So a lot of value there. And the last thing we love about these, obviously, is the handling. Once we get to code, if everything has been developed out and built out through an atomic system, well, then it's much easier to go in and do a small change. You can just do a change to one single atom or one single organism, and that change will then ripple through your entire design or through your entire code. So once again, less chances of breaking things. There's not multiple variables to change one thing, have it roll across, and much less chances for errors or surprises. So in a nutshell, we had a little summary right here, but it all comes down to the idea of the single responsibility principle, which is, it's in, as I mentioned right here, an age-old computer science precept, and it's do one thing, do it well. Do an atom, do it well. Do an organism, do it well. Don't have multiple variables that you need to maintain and upkeep and work upon. Have much less things, and out of these smaller amount of tools that you have, then you can build much more complex elements that won't break apart. So that's great. And an example of a design system, this is the design system we're currently building out for a boat, as I was talking about, and it sounds easy, right? You've got your different headlines from your H1s to H6s, your different labels. We've got all the different colors. We've got a grid system. On the right, you can see all the different icons, different listing cards, different drop downs and all that. It's all very simple. There's talks about design systems. There's videos about it. We all know it. It all makes a lot of sense. But where it really gets interesting is when the startup enters. The startup enters and changes everything that we know about a design system. And how does it do so? This is a great example of how it does so, and I love this quote, and it's the old motto for Facebook, which was "Move fast and break things." They've obviously changed their motto since then. They realized it wasn't the best motto, but it is still a motto that kind of encapsulates us in the startup world. We race to create investor pitch decks. We race to create prototypes. We want to launch our MVPs. We want to race to launch before the capital runs out. We're constantly racing. We're moving fast. And we love it. But the challenge with that is we don't necessarily have time to get the foundational work done. So the foundational work done is that complete design system I was just telling you about. Quite often we don't have time to do all that. We kind of hit the ground and we run. And the challenge is, well, how can we be smart and work with our proper atomic system? How can we create proper design system when we need to hit the ground, run, move, and constantly iterate? And that's hopefully what I can give you a couple of cues about. So obviously, this has happened to a lot of us. You know, hey, designer, do you want to start our startup? And of course, you're like, oh yeah, I want to join your startup. It sounds fascinating. And your question is, do you have a style guide? The answer is, no, we don't. Your next question, well, you've got brand standards, right? I can start with the brand standards. No, we don't have a brand standards. Well, you guys have a brand, right? At least got a logo and some colors and some typefaces I can work with. And usually the answer is, not really. Kind of maybe have a logo. We're not quite sure. But you know, we like one color. You've got a logo. Not so much. I've actually worked on a couple of projects recently which didn't have any of these elements. And you're like, okay, that's okay. I'm the designer. And you're like, yeah, that's right. I am the designer. I can build all this. I can work on the brand as well. And then they say, great, join the team. By the way, we're currently on sprint 4. And this is where you obviously freak out, right? You go, oh God, this is fine. I got this. We're on sprint 4, which means that we're halfway through sprint 4. We're going to start sprint 5 next Monday. I don't have time to do all the foundational work. I don't have time to define all the colors, define all the variables, create all my atoms. I don't have time to explore different typography choices. I don't have time to determine exactly which colors the brand should have, because I need to hit the ground, start running, start designing, start iterating and building with the dev team, and I need to solve design and user problems, but I don't even know what my atoms are yet. And this is where a lot of us get ourselves into. So hopefully we've got some tools to go around that. And the idea is to really get as modular as we can. And thankfully, design tools have changed quite a bit recently, and they're enabling us to be very modular, and they just force us to kind of think differently than what we've done in the past. But hopefully, if we think this way, we're able to do both. We're able to dive into sprint number 4, start solving user problems, but at the same time, we can build the design system in a modular and adaptive way that can evolve over time as we're still building the design system as we go. And really the solution with that, I think the high level key to all this is design tokens, which is a very different way for a lot of us designers to think about things. The idea of a design token, all in all, is to replace elements with a variable. The idea being that in the past, we used to say, oh, the brand blue. Oh yeah, the brand blue is, I don't know my hex values by heart, but EB5C12. And then we would design with that code, and then our dev friends would put in that code. But that doesn't quite work because we're not quite sure what the brand blue is actually. We know it's probably a blue, but we don't know which blue. And it might not even be blue. And we can think of the same variable for the typography. We can think of the same variable for everything, for the icon sets. Everything has to be thought out as a variable that can change over time. And this is the idea right here. So as opposed to I was pretty far off actually. It's a 2680 EB in this case for our blue. As opposed to referring to that in your designs and in your code as the hex value, we'll give it a name. Call it blue 400, which is our mid blue. And when you're designing with blue 400. And then the dev team can then build out to blue 400. And then in the back end and within your design software, you can then define that variable as being blue 400 is 2680 EB. And the great thing with that is if ever things need to change, you can just go back, change the value of blue 400 within your design or within your code. And once again, through everything will automatically ripple out and your designs will update automatically. If you've built everything out with components, if you've built everything out through this idea of atomic design, you can change the one atom and everything that's referring to that atom will flow out and automatically update. That said, there are a few things you really need to do before you start sprint 4. So your first week when you're diving into sprint 4, or it could be any sprint obviously, there's a couple of things you really need to get sorted. So start by getting at your grid and your spacing figured out. I find designers are getting much better at figuring out their grid. Okay, I got this. Let's do it for 8 and 12 column grid. We've got a Bootstrap system. We know how the grid and the spacing and the padding and the margins work. We got all that down. I think us designers can do a much better job working on the spacing scale. And the spacing scale is a scale that determines how many rems or pixels we also have between elements, which is really important, especially when you're stacking elements vertically. You can have a rule, for example, between your H1 and your body copy, you'll always have 40 pixels. Or between a button and a secondary button, you can always have 1 rem of padding. And determining that padding rule and always designing to it will really help you out, but also it'll help out your dev partner as well. And it'll ultimately make for a much more beautiful design. So I think we should start getting into that rhythm of getting the grid, the horizontal grid, but also start thinking about the vertical grid as well from the start. This is one of the few things that really shouldn't be changing much. It can't really be a variable. The other variables you want to set, once again, these are atoms, as we talked about. So the first elements are your color palettes. And the way I've been working on projects, this is a color palette from a project I was working on actually with Gearbox out of Victoria. We started working on the functionality of a platform and we didn't have a brand. So we knew the owner loved gold. So in this case, we set a gold primary. So you can see right in the middle right here, I've got a gold primary. No idea what the value was going to be. So we said, hey, chances are this is going to be our gold primary. And next to that gold primary, then I always recommend creating a few other tints of it. So in this case, from the primary, we had a gold darker and a gold darkest, which are two darker tones of it. And then we have two lighter tones of it as well. And these are defined as variables from the start. And on day one, the gold primary had a value of, in this case, 907D37. But every day or a couple of days, we get design feedback. As I'm building things out, I realize, oh, that gold is not quite right. I'm going to shift the hue around a little bit. And then I just simply change that hex value. But I know that my entire design updates automatically. So I think getting that down at the first level, getting your brand colors down, and every time you get a brand color, set your main color, create two darker tints, two lighter tints. You can obviously do, one tint or 5 tints. I find that 5 tints total is a good place to start. And then I do the same thing with my whites. I tend to create a series of design tokens for all my whites and grays. Usually 5, 6, 7, 10 of them, depending on the complexity of what you're building. And also create some variables for, this case, you can see on the bottom, green, yellow, and red. So these are my errors, notifications, and success messages. Set these from the start, and it doesn't really matter, once again, if the color is wrong. All you need to do is define the atom and create that atom, and make sure that you're referring back to that atom in everything you design. And as we're working, we're going to realize, well, that red doesn't really work with our brand colors. Doesn't matter. You can always go back, change that red. But thankfully, because everything is, once again, atomic and nested within layers and layers and layers, you simply go back to your master, change this one color, your entire design updates, and you're in a good place, which hopefully will help you out. Typography, obviously, this is obviously a challenge for this project I was working on. We didn't even have a brand font when we started, but we needed to start working on a lot of the elements. So what I recommend is, we know what the types we usually need, right? We need an H1 down to an H6. We'll probably need some body copy, some bold copy, some links. We'll probably want to have some input fields, some labels. We'll probably want to have some button stylings, probably some overlines, navigational elements. So let's define all of those, once again, as design tokens. On this project, the typeface changed 3 times, and the size of the different elements changed constantly. But at least we set them all from the start, and we're able to then start designing. And as I realize that, oh, that H2 is really not right, I just go back to my master, change the value of the H2. Sometimes it's just changing the tracking, changing the line height. Sometimes it's changing the font out completely. Because once again, we didn't have a brand. So maybe the brand typeface was going to evolve over time. And we're able to come back to this, change that, and then every instance of the H2 throughout, once again, the design of the code, updated automatically, makes your life much easier. I recommend we do the same thing with icons from day one. So as you're working, every icon that you have, create them as individual atoms and make sure that they're all designed to the same size. So in this case, on this project, they were all 50 by 50 pixels. Doesn't really matter what the size is, but just create them. So you're working something really quickly on a sprint. You're deep into it. Oh my God, I need a magnifying glass. Create an icon, 50 by 50, put a magnifying glass in there, create it as a variable design token. Doesn't matter if it looks good or not, just get it in there, and at least you can build things out. Your dev team can build out, you can do your user testing, and you can always come back later and look at this design, at this magnifying glass icon, say, you know what, I really don't like it, I'm gonna come in and redesign it, but then you just change that instance. So in this case, on the design, I could just change the icon within the actual granular level, and then every instance of that magnifying glass gets updated throughout the site automatically. Once again, making my life easier, but also enabling me to design and come back, change elements, and have my design update automatically. This is a little GIF done by the Figma team, which kind of shows the latest iteration of that. So in this case, they had a button, and you can see you can just go back and change any of the variables, and within their design element, in this case, they have an organism. They're able to come in, a molecule. They can come in, change the individual atoms, and you can see that the design can update. But the great thing is, in this case, they're just swapping the icons out, but you can also go back to the individual icon and change the design of the icon. And in this case, your components would change automatically, which means that you can start designing even without knowing, oh, do I want my icons to be colored or black and white? Should have the round edges? Obviously, we'd like to know that, but chances are in the startup world, we're nowhere near there at the brand level yet, but at least we can get started, get working, come back, and change things. Another element we should start building out as soon as we can are the buttons and inputs. So this is an example for that build project once again. So we have all the inputs, right? So an input field, disabled, the focus, the active, the hover, the arrow states, and what have you. Inputs with the drop downs with a secondary drop down. Ideally, we start defining these as fast as we can. And what I've actually done for most of my projects, I've built out a sort of base component for an input and a button. And whenever I start a new project, I just port that over, and then I change the styling of it over time. But once again, working with this idea of the atoms, I can always come back and say, well, it turns out that this label, I don't like the typeface, or it should be uppercase. I can just go back to the atom for the input, make it uppercase, and then boom, my entire design updates. In this case, this blue, this is the brand blue. If I change the brand blue at the base level, the focus in this button will automatically update and reflect that as well. So it just means that I can at least start creating components and patterns and see them change and evolve over time. I'm not getting myself into a situation where I need to design everything, and then we find out, oh my God, that's the wrong blue. This brand shouldn't be blue, turns out it should be green. And that's the last thing you want to know as a designer, because if they make that decision, it's probably going to be at the worst possible time for you, and you don't want to spend an entire night changing every single individual blue on the site to the proper blue. Once again, having them as variables, very easy to do. We've talked a lot about variables, but one thing I recommend we do both as developers and designers is start thinking, how can I design and build also at a component level? So in this case, this is a screenshot of the inputs that we saw a few seconds ago, but within Figma. And you can see what I do. I've got my, in this case, my input/D indicating it's the desktop input, which I've made a master component. So for those of you not familiar with Figma, whenever you see anything purple, that means it's your master component, meaning that every other instance of an input that I'm using for my designs will refer back to this input. And what I like to do is have simply one input, and every instance is actually within this master. So you can see I have my regular, disabled, focused, activated, the inputting, meaning how the cursor view looks, the hover states, the errors, the success, and any icons that I want to add here. They're all within the same component. And then all I can do whenever I'm working, I don't need to go to my assets library and have 50 different inputs that I can bring in. That's nice, but if you've got 50 inputs, that means you need to manage 50 different ones, which means more time managing, less time iterating, less time designing. I recommend we create one component. In this case, all my inputs live within here. And what I do is whenever I drag my input in, if I want the regular, I just make that one visible. So you can see the eye is turned on. I can take the same input, turn off the regular, turn on the activated, and then the design will update automatically. Meaning that if ever I need to change values or colors or the size of the input, I can simply go back to my master input, resize this one component, and then every instance, so everything we're seeing on this slide here, all these instances will automatically resize and redo their padding and be automatically updated. I can change the stroke once, and all these strokes will change. So we're not only talking about changing the value of the disabled and the focused and the activated individually, but all these refer back to one particular organism as well. So once again, the most you can start thinking about building things in these sort of interlinked and compact way through this idea of the atomic designs, it'll make your designs that much easier to maintain. I noticed over time when we're building elements, especially for startups, once again, where the brand is evolving and shifting, I ended up spending way more time maintaining my assets and trying to keep them clean than doing actual design work. And I think the solution we found is to limit the amount of master components that we have and have the fewest elements of atoms and organisms building those, so that you can come back to this one input, say, turns out we don't want it to be 50 by 250 pixel size, we want it to be 75. I changed this one input, changed the size, and not only all the default inputs change, but once again, all the variations of that element change as well through my design. So it just makes life much, much easier. Of course, the challenge there, some of you might have caught on and say, well, that's great, but you talked before about maybe changing the size of your buttons, or you talked about changing the size of the H2 or changing the line height. Well, if everything is designed out and you change one of your building blocks, well, your whole design will break, right? And that's where I really recommend you start thinking about designing with auto layouts as much as you can. Auto layout, this is the Figma auto layout, but Sketch is doing this as well. I'm not proficient with XD, but I'm sure they've got something similar or will have very soon. But the idea of auto layout is it enables you to create padding rules within your designs, which are automated, if you will. So in this case, you can see that within this card, it's been said that there'll be 20 pixels vertical height between this organism right here and the second organism, meaning that if ever this image, I decide to change the vertical size of that image, I don't want it to be horizontal, I want it to be square, I can go back to the atom of this image, make it square, and then automatically the card will change its size, the padding between the elements and the copy here and the buttons, all these will automatically update themselves, which is fantastic because that means I can build all my components to be able to be updated automatically. I can change anything I want and things will automatically update. So for those of you who haven't worked with components, this is an idea. So this is a screenshot from within Figma, and you can see that you can turn on, in this case, you can turn on the magnifying glass, and you can notice that as I'm typing in, the size of the button grows because I was able to dictate within, in this case, Figma. Well, not me, I didn't create the skip, but the person who did was able to say, well, the copy is centered, there's 20 pixels of padding between the magnifying glass, if it does exist, and the copy. And if the copy grows, simply grow the size of the button, but you'll notice that the padding between the button and the, the input and the go button is persistent as well. So you can have auto layouts within auto layouts, nested within other auto layouts. And it really enables you to start building really interesting examples. So this is a great example right here. As you're adding more content, things grow down. So this is auto layout as we know it, right? A lot of us have been using these designs, but the way we've been using it a lot in startup world where things change is through that same mindset, but saying, well, maybe these buttons need to change color. Maybe they need to be twice as big. Maybe once again, this video needs to change ratio, but that's okay as well. Everything can kind of update. Maybe this body copy needs to change from, in this case, Helvetica to another typeface, and that typeface needs to be a little bit taller. Doesn't matter. You can go in and change your typeface. Your components, your designs will not break. They'll just flow and they'll automatically resize themselves, meaning that everything can be variable, which is fantastic. That's really your best friend when you're working, once again, with an unsolved brand. And you can get really clever. For example, this is an example of a drop-down menu. And you can see that in this case, every menu item is set as an individual component, meaning that when you're designing a menu, you can say, I want 6 menu items, or I want one of these menu items to change in my design system from being a menu item to being a separator. And you'll notice that automatically everything, obviously the copy disappears, becomes a divider, but then the size of the drop-down automatically updates as well. And because these padding rules have been created, if ever my menu items, the typography grows, changes color, I need to change the styling from, in this case, let's pretend it's an H5. I need to make that an H4 for whatever reason. Well, the box will also change size. Everything will restack and re-update, meaning that you don't even need to maintain your design and think about how things will break, which happened so much in the past. I had designers say, oh, we want to make all the inputs, 2 points bigger. And then I would need to obviously change that size, but then see every instance of an input and redesign them. In this case, if everything's working with auto layouts, it's very easy. Everything will automatically update for you and make your life that much easier once again. And the goal is, as I mentioned, less maintaining, more variables, so that we can do more of our actual work, which is solving UX and solving user and design challenges, as opposed to maintaining multiple instances of components and designs. And once we've done all this, well, then we should be happy, because we're working with a great team. We're creating a really interesting, disruptive app, and the typography can change, the colors can change, anything can grow and vary, and my design will never break, which will ultimately make my life a little easier and hopefully give me that work-life balance that we're all trying to achieve, right? Which is ultimately what we're hoping for. So to summarize what I wanted to talk about today is no brand, no problem. And once again, you're talking to a guy with 15 years experience agency-wise, where I design brands. I'm not saying brands are not important. What I'm saying in today's talk is we can get started without a brand. And in order to do so, we need to think and build atomic. We need to start creating a design system, and there's certain steps we need to lay out. Those have been laid out today. So typography, buttons, icons, and colors, those all need to be designed and defined, but define them as variables. Don't define them as constants. And then as much as you can, design and think with the idea of an auto layout, so that if your type changes, if your avatars need to change size, if you're going from a circle to a square that needs to be twice as big, you know that all your instances, all your components, all your pages, your templates will automatically flow out, and your designs won't break. And hopefully there'll be a little bit of upkeep, but it'll be much less upkeep than going back to say, oh my God, we have to change from Helvetica to OpenSAL. The client doesn't realize, but that means that everything is a little bit bigger and then everything broke. and we're a day away from the presentation pitch to the investors. What are we going to do? Well, hopefully we can just flip the switch at the atom level, watch everything roll out, double check our designs, catch a few instances where the auto layout didn't do anything, but hopefully everything will update automatically. And the last step is update as you work. Once we've defined these variables, always go back to your variables and change them. Update them, change the colors and what have you, and hopefully keep maintaining that design system and grow it and expand it. And once you have that basis of the basic elements, well, every time you design a new component or a new organism or a new template, create a component out of it. Try to think how you can build it with this idea of the auto layout best you can. Create one instance of it, move that to components panel, and always take the extra, 15, 20 minutes to do so. We don't always have that time, but trust me, if you take that time to create those components and refer back to them and build them with this idea of the modular auto layout, it will come back to save you, and it'll most probably save you exactly when you don't have the time to put into doing the updates. So you'll be very thankful for doing so. So that being said, I covered a lot of stuff today. I tried to keep some time, gonna get a sense check, 3:06. So I went a little bit faster than expected. So I was hoping to keep some time to answer any questions or have a discussion with any of you. So I'm gonna stop sharing the deck because we're done. I wanted to say thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully I can answer any questions or have a discussion if you have any. Otherwise, I will wish you all the best of days and thank you immensely for showing up.
Thank you so much, Stephane, for sharing your experiences and expertise in design systems. So even without the animation, I thought your slides were so dynamic, coherent, and very engaging.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I thought the reusability, efficiency, and like the iterative process in design systems you've talked about today, really cool and interesting. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll talk about it. I see some comments. Oh, there's a question. What's your opinion on Bootstrap as a basis for a design system?
That's a really great question. Most projects that I start with, that question does get brought up. I tend to push away from it. And the reason I do, once again, I'm the designer. And the reason I do is because on a lot of the projects I work on, and I have a strong branding background, and I tend to find that a lot of the bootstraps that I've had the chance to work with, that we've looked at incorporating, were a little bit too limiting, if you will, in order for the brand to really shine. I think if I was working on a project which is much more, for example, an accounting platform or something that's a little bit more task focused, I think there's a lot of value, and I would strongly recommend looking into that. I tend to work a little bit more in the branded stage of things, and we want a little bit more control over a lot of subtleties. So what I've been doing personally is I've been building my own sort of bootstrap system with engineers. I've been building it within Figma, they've been building it within code, and we tend to have our own, which is a little bit more design, open to design variables and design finesse, if you will. So that's why personally I don't use them, but there's a lot of value. It just doesn't correspond with the projects I tend to work with. Does that answer your question? Awesome.
There you go. We also have a couple comments on your presentation and design systems. Yeah, so any last minute comments or questions, feel free. And
yeah, that's a great comment, Brandon, the idea of jumping at any stage of the iterative process. So that's really what we need to do, right? Is to be as iterative and as modular as we can, because things constantly change, things constantly are thrown at us, and it's really hard to think about how am I gonna nail the brand? How am I gonna nail, what does an H5 look like when I don't even need to design the H5 today? Well, thankfully, it doesn't matter. Just throw an H5 in there and then come back to it later. Because what I really need to do right now is solve how the user can accomplish task X. That's what this week's sprint requires. But maybe I'll have some downtime next week, and then I can start thinking about H5s in the context of how they're designed when I've got some downtime. So hopefully it's trying to balance that sprint life versus design life. In the ideal world, we'd be able to just define all this before we start, obviously, designing. That was the beauty of working with the Adidas of the world, right? They've got a design system, they've got their colors, their fonts, everything's nailed, so that when you're working, you can go straight to the design system, straight into polishing your design. it's a little bit different for us because we're obviously, startup world, which is super exciting. And to your point, yeah, exactly, adapting to client expectations, and their expectations are different as well, right? Because you've got your sprints and your stories laid out, but they also have variables that come along the way. Oh my God, I got a chance to pitch to investor X tomorrow. However, I know they're allergic to Z. Could you change that? I've had that happen to me. And thankfully, building this way, once again, quick changes, and we're able to create a custom iteration or a sort of a white labeled version of our project for the investor decks, which happen all the time at the last minute in our world.
I have another question from Choi.
Yep.
Have you always thought about it in that way, meaning the way you approach design with development? If not, how did you go about adapting to this process?
That's a fantastic question, Troy. I'd like to say yes, but the answer is no. When I started, designers were my enemies because they were the developers were my enemies because they were the ones that weren't able to bring my vision to life. But thankfully, I grew out of that. And I think what really helped was the chance, and I would recommend this to all design studios. It was the chance to, when we redid the seating or the seating layout where we were, this was at DDB. It's as simple as that, but we made sure in the past the development team was actually disconnected from the UX and UI teams, which makes no sense, in my opinion. But a lot of companies are set up this way, and we made it a thing to change how the way the entire team was organized. And in this case, next to me was I was the creative lead. Next to me was the development lead, and next to us was the strategy lead. And in the entire floor, we switched how everyone was sitting down, so that we always had either a UX or a UI or a creative or a writer sitting next to either a back end or front end developer, and we mixed everyone together. And the beauty of that is the developers were able to see the design as they're working on it, but then the designers were able to see obviously what was being developed as they're working on it. Because once again, right, I'm bald, right? I'm old. I'm from the days of design everything out, package your PSD, dear God, that beats me, and throw it off to the development team, and you'll never see it again until it's live, and it's all sliced up for you. But having everyone sit together and hear what everyone else is working on, hear what they're struggling with, and when it's the second time you hear the dev team struggling with something you've built, well, then you get that aha moment. Well, wait a minute, they don't know that I can, but I can change this little thing that takes 20 minutes from me, and it's going to reduce, take half a day of work off their plate. Well, that's a great idea. And then you start talking and you start collaborating, and life's just much easier. So that's kind of how it changed for me, this idea of reworking seating processes and trying to break away from this old sort of waterfall approach to development.
Answer. Troy says amazing. We also have another question from Joseph. We have a lot of products that differentiate on their visual design themes. In your experience, how similar can the base variables or atoms be across projects?
That's a great question. In my case, they're the same, meaning that I've put in a lot of personal time building out a series of atoms and components. I work within Figma mostly, and I've built all of my atoms out within Figma, and every time I start a new project, I'll port those all over to a new project. And I've put in a lot of time to do it so, but the way I built them, the same base input, the same base button is ported over from project to project, same base grids. However, the way I've built them is so modular that I can go in and change everything about them. Oh, in this case, the buttons are squares. In this case, they're circles. In this project, the inputs are not, they're just underlines. And the way I've built them is so modular that I can go in, change the colors, change the type, change the size, change the actual structure of all the components, and have it roll across the design. So it's been an invaluable asset. And as a designer, if you don't know what to do in your spare time, build out these components. The great thing is you can then, you've got them, and they're so easy to, if you think about it, they're so easy to reuse. And I haven't come across a limitation yet in the way I've been building them that a complete redesign forced me to tear it down and restart, which has been super helpful. It's a great time save. There's nothing worse than designing 17 input states on every project. Ideally, you can just do a couple of little tweaks and get it fit perfectly within the brand, and that's the goal, right? We want to streamline that part of the process, but at the same time, we don't want it to look like if it's not a custom design at the same time. So it gives you more time to work on what really is important and not what's not important, which is think about all your different inputs and states and what have you.
We also have, oh, I was just going to mention, there's a follow-up question from Zenon, but you might have already answered it. He asked, do you have a collection of modules that you use as a basis, or do you start from scratch every time? And I know you touched on that a little bit, but do you have anything else to add?
The one thing I would add is I've been putting a lot of time and brain space towards this. I haven't been able so far to find a, we all know how there's those Sketch or XD or Figma design system solutions that we can purchase and download and work from. From my opinion, they're okay if you need to start working on it today, but none of them really work within this kind of modular, interconnected way. I haven't found one yet. So what I would recommend is, unfortunately, I think we need to build our own. I haven't found one yet, even with the paying ones that are properly built where everything is properly interconnected, which is unfortunate. So I tend to go back to the same every time. And then the great thing is when I'm jumping from project to project, my toolkit just grows, right? I have multiple different inputs. I have multiple kind of drop downs. And every time I jump on a new project, I've got my base kit. And every project, the base kit grows and grows and grows, which gets me to be much more efficient, which is fantastic.
Yeah, Zen says, cool, thanks for expanding. And we have a couple comments as well. Another question from Emily. She says, amazing presentation. Are there any resources you would recommend for further insight in an auto layout design approach? Great question.
That's a great question, Emily. I don't have it top of mind. There's two great references I found. One, which was the actual Figma website does a really great job of going into auto layout. The reason being is they were the first to come up with this, so they do a great job, and they've completely revamped their auto layout system in the last week or two. So it's really worth checking out their website. And there's another article, I believe it's maybe the best thing if you want, Emily, my email is on the screen. If you want to send me an email, I can link it out to you. It was an article, 30 tips and tricks for auto layouts within Figma, something like that. It was a great blog post that go into detail. That's where I pulled this reference from, for example. And they go into a lot of detail into how they like to build their systems as a series of components. So if Google doesn't help you with that, just please do send me an email at this address and I'll get that link over to you. But do check out the Figma website. They've been very good. And as I mentioned, they've done a great update to the auto layout system. In the past, it was a universal auto layout, meaning that if I said 20 pixels of vertical padding, it was everything within sort of the group that I built was 20 pixels vertical padding, which meant that if you wanted 20 here and 40 there, you need to start creating some individual, like invisible divs, just like our dev friends do within your designs to make it work, which worked, but was complicated. In the last 2 weeks, they've rolled out a system where you can have different padding rules for vertical and horizontal for every single one of your elements within a component, which makes it much more flexible. So you can say, I want 20 pixels between the H1 and the body copy, but I want 40 pixels between the body copy and the image. And you can do all of that within one inspector panel, as opposed to kind of cheating it the way I've been doing in the past. So check out Figma's website. I think they're going pretty hard into it because it's such a new feature and it's a great selling point for them. They're going out of their way to expand and educate people on this.
Also, do you mind sharing your email once again in the chat? Because I'm not able to see it.
Oh, because I had to turn off. Yes, definitely. If you guys want to reach me, there's my email. So please, I'm happy to answer any questions. Rising tide raises all ships, right? So if I can pass any knowledge off to you guys will ultimately pass it back to me eventually. So happy to share anything that I can with you guys.
So much, Stephane. And thank you to all of you who have attended this session today. Emily says, thank you very much. And
well, thank you.
If we don't have any more questions or comments, I guess that's it.
I guess we're done.
Yeah. Reach out to Stephane via the email if you have any further questions. And thank you. That's it.
And big thanks to everyone for showing up. Big thanks to Gearbox. Do check out they're in Victoria. They're a fantastic dev shop. They do really great, and they really exemplify my attitude of do good work with good people. They're smart. They're beautiful humans. They do smart, beautiful work. So do check them out of Victoria. Fantastic people.
They have a virtual booth that goes on until 1 p.m. So you can still catch them after the session.
Tom, there is not a place online you can find my presentation, but I do keep it on my Dropbox. That's where I was running it from. So if you want to send me an email at the email you see in the chat, I'll make sure to send you a link to the PDF of the presentation. Happy to do so. With the caveat that I don't own any of the content in here, half it was ripped off the web. So if we're all clear that there's no copyright here, I'll be happy to share it with you.